What's the takeaway other than our guys shined?
Yeah, I think Braden Fisk all of them had good weeks. Johnny Wilson, from everybody you talked to, had a good week. Jaheim Bell had a good week and played some in the game on Saturday. But I think Braden Fisk did the most for himself. I mean, and he's a guy that, I've wondered, he's a really good college player. I wondered when he came in here how he would adjust to the jump to Power 5. He obviously did that really well. And I think from what you saw in that game, the way they used him, and then what was really cool, one thing I didn't write about, I mentioned it in my story, but it was really cool, was after the game, because they switched him. He was on the American team. The national team needed defensive linemen, so they switched him that day. And all of the American defensive linemen, really, and a bunch of American team players were going to him after the game and like kind of mad at him for switching sides and for playing so well. And so
it's a good compliment.
You could just tell all these other college all-stars that were there all week really liked him and the way he plays.
I heard McShay on Russillo. I don't even know if McShay works for anyone anymore. I literally don't know what his job is. But he talked about Braden. Well, he called him Braden Fisk, but he talked about Braden Fisk being the one of the most impressive guys at the Senior Bowl. And I don't even think he was talking about the game. He was talking about the one-on-ones and the practices.
Right.
And he was good. He was perfectly good in the game. He was very good in the game. They double-teamed him the whole time. And you start to wonder, I mean, I don't think he's a first-round pick, obviously. He's not maybe quite the requisite size for a first-round defensive tackle, but he's a second-day pick, right? He might be the third player drafted by Florida State, don't you think? Don't you think he's worked himself into that?
Yeah, I thought at the end of the year he was virtually unblockable. You saw him, really dominate games, and he did a lot over the course of the year to kind of move up the ladder, if you will. When he first got here, you just thought he might be a really nice addition to the team. He was going to play, had to prove he was healthy. Then from there, you realized he was a difference maker. He wasn't just a fill. He was a guy that really kind of could change the game for stretches. And then late, I remember thinking, well, if this continues, he is going to play his way into that, third Florida State guy off the board. We're talking about Jared Verse and Keon Coleman going 1-2 for the Noles in terms of the order of Florida State players that get drafted. But yeah, Corey, I think you're right. He could. He's been really, really good, and he's so quick for that size.
Yeah, and when I asked him what's next, he said, well, I'm going back to train in Miami for the Combine and going to run a fast 40. And I believe it, man. When you see that straight line speed, like when he chases the ball down, there was that clip people posted on social media for the weekend. Dude's moving.
He outruns, Mike Norvell is, I'll grant you 42 or whatever, but he was a receiver and he's like a $190. He's outrunning him. That's kind of crazy. He's fast. He's very quick, twitchy off the line. He's really strong. So good for him. Yeah. It should be noted once again. I've brought it up before, but for all of the anger that people felt about the Orange Bowl, there were a lot of guys that, like Braden Fisk and others, who needed small procedures, something to get themselves ready. They had to prepare themselves for this because they can really change your financial fortunes. I mean, this is a lot more important than that exhibition game, and it was sad what happened, and we all know the reasons for it. But here's an example of a guy that's probably made himself a ton of money by readying himself for that event.
He's also
do you guys think that if Florida State gets more players drafted than Alabama this year, that I might tweet about it?
Well,
and
Corey,
one of them might not be the quarterback. So, again, we're talking about who I would guess Jordan Travis could be drafted, but it's going to be late. And he might be the 7th or 8th player drafted. Jaheim Bell get drafted before him. I don't know, Renardo Green probably. There's guys that will betray Benson. Like he might be drafted, Johnny Wilson. So you're talking about the 7th or 8th guy that gets drafted, maybe. And it's like, okay, just know that I'm going to be clocking that. How many Alabama guys get drafted? How many Florida State guys get drafted? So we can just revisit that discussion about how Alabama was clearly a better team because of the quarterback.
Yeah, and this is a draft that I think Florida State fans have been very excited about for a while. We projected before the year even began that they could have 10 to 12 guys potentially go in the draft. Now think about that. How long has it been since Florida State had anything close to double digits in the draft? And all of a sudden, on Sundays, and I love NFL football, not everybody does, but it gets easier if you're a Florida State fan to flip on the NFL on Sundays when you can flip around the league and you see a guy on almost every team that you're watching. At least one player out there on the field is a Florida State guy. And it's really, really good for your program, for the look of your program, and to draw more players in. And we've told this story 1,000 times, but if all those transfers end up getting drafted, many of them in the first 4 rounds, it's huge for the next group of kids that you're going to be bringing in the portal. Why wouldn't you come here?
Especially most of those guys, if not all of them, maybe everybody other than Keon Coleman, probably, and maybe Jared Verse, were not anywhere near that level at their previous school. You know, the Trey Bensons and Johnny Wilson really didn't do much at the previous schools. You look at even
Jerry Jones is going to get drafted.
Yeah, Braden Fisk. Maybe, but I feel like just doing it at this level, doing it at the Power 5 level, helped solidify it. He may have done that if he had gone to Notre Dame. He probably would have. I don't think there's any doubt.
He's a good player.
I do think Odell and that staff has done a good job with him, but he was really a good player. But when he came to Florida State, but yeah, the most of those guys, and then you talk about some of those older guys who really developed in the program, Renardo Green and Jarian Jones and some of those guys. So yeah, man, I think the draft is going to be. Because they didn't, they've gotten it with 23 wins over the last 2 seasons, but I think the draft will be another validation for Mike Norvell and that staff.
Do you remember when COVID happened? You guys remember that, right? When COVID kind of shut down?
I think so. I think it was
2020. Yeah, it was 2020. Great year all around. But I remember the draft that year when Devin Vassell and Patrick Williams, I think, were 2 of the top 10 or 12 picks. And people were like, man, Leonard really had a good team this past year. And we're like, yeah, no, duh. We watched them beat everybody they played. They were like 26-5 when the season was canceled. But it was like that draft. The draft, it shouldn't have, but it validated just how talented that team was, where those 2 guys, one of them was a 6th man. Vassell averaged, he was the leading scorer, but he averaged 13 a game. I think there could be there will be a reckoning with this draft too, even if it's just 7 or 8 guys off this team, that it's not just like TCU where they had 2 dudes drafted and they won a lot of games. I mean, this was a very talented team and an undefeated team that, it wasn't just loaded with pretty good players. They were NFL players. And that's what I think the draft will tell people.
I agree. And I think that's already started with these all-star games, which a lot of times these all-star games don't really mean a whole lot. To your point, a lot of times it is what they do in practice more than it is what they do in the games. But what they've done in practice is, if this game, the East-West Shrine game, they have individually, and I think that's kind of what's been good for it's almost weird. It's almost like backwards for a team. That team was so successful because of the completeness of the team. Like, it was not a team built on 1 or 2 superstars. That's why the whole argument from Herb Street and that crew was ridiculous, because what made that team great was that it was such a complete team. And because it was such a complete team, I think some people got underappreciated. And so now when they go to these all-star events or when they go to the combine, I think it's going to give them a chance to kind of get their individual shine, which, maybe they didn't get during the season, especially because they got snubbed out of the playoff.
It's a weird deal, man. Going back to the start of the season, when I would talk to Noles throughout the state that aren't up here, don't get to go to practice, not in the media, didn't know what, they're just Florida State fans that I know and have been friends with for a long time. They'll text me, what do you think about the team? What strength, weaknesses, whatever. Like, one of the things that I kept bringing up to those people who are out of town who wanted the inside dope, that was like, look, man, we have some NFL players here. Like, it was really easy to recognize each segment group. You could be like, that guy's going to the league, that guy's going to the league. And I think I said it to one of you two just walking around. We haven't said that in a long time.
We may have to do the draft contest again.
It's been a minute.
We haven't done it.
It used to depress us. It was kind of a joke. There was a stretch there where I didn't like when Gene would send out the email. I'm like, we probably shouldn't do this.
There might be one guy in the 6th round. I don't know.
Yeah, it was tough. I'd be sending back undrafted free agents with like every guy that was on the list. And he's like, you really don't think? No, he's not going to get drafted, Gene. But no, this time around, I really thought going into the season, there was the possibility of 10 to 12. Yeah, you got to play out a season, dudes get hurt, whatever it might be. But yeah, I thought they had 10 to 12 NFL looking guys. And I happen to know somebody who's connected with the Seattle Seahawks organization who scouts for them. And his first text that he sent me was that, hey man, there's a lot more NFL talent here than there was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Like, yeah. That's what I've been saying. He's doing a good job of bringing in, because that really does indicate where you're at as a program. Every year, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, others just stockpile the draft of players.
Yeah.
Florida State hasn't been doing that. They will this year.